She had been a nurse for 3 years at Redwood Valley Military Medical Center, and for 3 years nobody had looked twice at Maya Carter. She changed dressings, monitored vitals, documented charts. She did not complain. She did not push back. When Dr. Victor Hale called her incompetent in front of the entire ER staff, loud enough that patients in the hallway could hear, she stood there and took it. Then a Navy SEAL hit the floor with 3 rounds in his chest and blood pooling fast under the gurney, and Maya Carter stopped being invisible. Her hands moved before anyone else in that room had finished processing what they were seeing, and the soldier opened his eyes, looked straight at her, and said, "You've done this before." If this story already has you locked in, hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The emergency room at Redwood Valley Military Medical Center ran loud on a Thursday evening. Portland in late October meant rain on the windows and a waiting area packed wall to wall with people. A construction worker with a lacerated forearm, a retired veteran whose oxygen numbers kept dropping, 2 kids with fevers their parents had let climb too long. The overhead lights buzzed at a frequency that gave you a headache after an hour, and the staff moved through it all with the clipped, practiced efficiency of people who had stopped flinching at things that would stop anyone else cold. Maya Carter had been on shift since 6 in the morning. She was 31 years old, 5'4", with dark hair she kept pinned back so tight it pulled at the skin near her temples. She was not the kind of person who took up space in a room. She had learned, over 3 years at Redwood Valley, that the fastest way to get through a shift without incident was to do the work quietly, document everything precisely, and stay out of the orbit of people who like to hear themselves talk. Dr. Victor Hale liked to hear himself talk more than anyone else in that building. She was recalibrating a medication drip on bed 6. Mr. Okafor, 62, COPD exacerbation, sat holding at 91. When she heard Hale's voice cut across the floor. "Carter." She looked up. He was standing at the nursing station with a chart in one hand, and even from across the room she could read the posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted, the look he used when he wanted an audience. She crossed the floor without hurrying. "Dr. Hale? Walk me through what happened with the Darrow case." James Darrow, 47, came in 3 hours ago with chest pain that had been going on since noon. Maya had flagged the presentation twice. Atypical MY indicators, left arm radiation. The guy was sweating through his shirt even though the ER was cold. She had documented it. She had pulled the attending, Dr. Nessa Vaught, and flagged it verbally. The delay in getting him to cardiology had not been on her. "I documented everything in real time," she said. "I flagged the atypical presentation at 1400 and again at, you missed the secondary symptom cluster." Hale's voice was flat. His blood pressure dropped, and you had him on a general cardiac monitor instead of moving to full telemetry. "I escalated to Dr. Vaught at 1404. The monitor change was her call." "You're a nurse, Carter. You advocate for the patient. If you thought he needed telemetry, you should have pushed harder." She kept her face even. "I advocated. I documented. I escalated. That's the protocol." "The protocol," he repeated, and the word came out like she'd said something stupid. He raised his voice just enough, not shouting. Hale never shouted, that would have been too direct. But the volume shift was deliberate, enough that the 2 nurses at the station looked up, enough that the paramedic finishing her paperwork 2 desks over went still. The protocol doesn't cover for a nurse who doesn't have the clinical instincts to know when a patient is deteriorating. Maya felt the particular stillness that came over her in moments like this. Not calm, exactly. More like the way water goes quiet before a current pulls hard. "I have the documentation," she said again. "Documentation doesn't bring back a patient." He set the chart on the counter with a sharp crack. "James Darrow is in the ICU. If he doesn't come out of this, there will be a review, and your file is going to be at the center of it. I'd think very carefully, Carter, about whether this is the right environment for you." That was the line. That was always the line with Hale. Just close enough to threat that you felt it. Just far enough that he could walk it back if someone pushed. She had watched him use it on 3 other nurses in the last year. 2 of them had transferred. 1 had quit. Understood, she said. She turned and went back to Mr. Okafor. Behind her, she heard Hale say something low to the nurses at the station, and then someone laughed, short and uncomfortable. She did not look back. She adjusted the drip, documented the change, and told herself the same thing she told herself every time. It doesn't matter, do the work. She had been telling herself that for 3 years. She was getting tired of it. The convoy came in at 6:47 p.m. Maya heard it before she saw it, the specific clatter of a military vehicle making a hard turn into the ambulance bay, followed by radio chatter that didn't sound like the normal paramedic traffic. She was at the triage desk when the doors blew open and the first stretcher came through fast, pushed by 2 men in tactical gear with combat patches on their shoulders. The man on the stretcher was big, 6'2" at least, broad through the chest, and his shirt had been cut away to reveal a wound packing that was already soaked through on the left side. His face was the gray-white of someone running on the last of his reserves. Behind the stretcher came a second man, military bearing, dark jacket, no insignia, and then a third figure that stopped Maya cold for half a second, a Belgian Malinois on a tactical lead, moving fast but controlled, hackles up, fixed entirely on the man on the stretcher. "Gunshot, single entry left lateral chest," the man with the dog said. He had the cadence of someone reporting to a commander, not asking for help. "We packed it 40 minutes ago in the field. He's had 1 liter saline, morphine 5 milligrams. Pressure dropped twice during transport." The ER attending on the floor was Dr. Lin Chu, and she was already moving. "Trauma Bay 2, someone get respiratory on the line." Maya was moving before Dr. Chu finished the sentence. It was automatic. She wasn't thinking about it. She came around the desk and fell into position at the head of the stretcher, reading the wound, reading the man's color, reading the way his chest was moving. Or not moving, the right way. The ER tech beside her, a guy named Darnell, who had been here longer than anyone, looked at her and then looked again because she was already pulling gloves on with the focused precision of someone who had done this in worse places than a trauma bay. "BP?" she asked the soldier holding the IV line. 82/50, last check." "When?" 12 minutes ago." She looked at the wound. The packing was good. Whoever had done it in the field knew what they were doing, but the bleed-through rate told her the vessel involvement was higher than the entry wound suggested. She reached across and pressed 2 fingers along the lateral chest wall with a specific, deliberate pressure, mapping the damage from the outside, the way you learned to do when imaging wasn't available. "He needs a chest tube before we can push volume," she said, and then stopped, because she had said it out loud to a trauma bay full of people who had not asked her. Dr. Chu looked at her. "That's going to be my call," Dr. Chu said, not unkindly. "Yes, ma'am." Maya stepped back, but she didn't stop watching the monitor. The rhythm was holding, but the pressure curve was telling her something the number wasn't. Hale appeared at the edge of the trauma bay. She felt him before she saw him, the way the air in the room shifted when he walked in, the small recalibration of attention. He saw the military personnel, and his face did the thing it did when he wanted to look like the person in charge. "What do we have?" "Gunshot wound, lateral chest, packed in the field," Dr. Chu said. "I'm going to assess for hemothorax before we get imaging first." Hale crossed to the monitor. "We go by the book." "Imaging takes time we may not have," Maya said. It came out quiet. Not challenging. She was not trying to be challenging. But it came out, and the room went still, in the way rooms went still when the wrong person spoke at the wrong moment. Hale turned to look at her slowly. "I'm sorry?" "His pressure's trending down and the bleed-through on the packing is accelerating. If there's significant hemothorax, imaging delays intervention." "Carter." The word was controlled, quiet, and absolute. "You are not the physician in this room." "No, sir." "Then I'd suggest you step back." She stepped back. She watched the monitor. She watched the patient's face, which had the specific slack quality of someone whose body was starting to make decisions without him. His eyes were open, barely, and they tracked to her with the unfocused intensity of someone fighting to stay present. His lips moved. She leaned in without thinking. "You know this procedure," he said. The voice was barely air. "Don't you?" It was not a question. She straightened up. Her hands were very still at her sides. Across the trauma bay, the second military man, the one with the jacket, no insignia, was watching her with an expression she recognized. The kind of attention that came from someone who had learned to watch people for a living. "Get me a chest tube tray," she said to Darnell. Dr. Hale said, "I heard what Dr. Hale said." She looked at Darnell. "Get me the tray." Dr. Chu looked at the monitor, looked at Maya, looked at the patient. "Do it," she said to Darnell, and then to Hale. "His pressure's 68. I'm not waiting for imaging." Hale's face went flat. "Dr. Chu, I'm the attending on this case." It was the first time Maya had heard Lin Chu cut Hale off with that tone. The room registered it. Hale registered it, and the way he registered it, the stillness, the slight draw of breath, told Maya this was not going to be forgotten. But for the moment, there was a man dying on the table, and Chu was moving, and Maya was moving, and the rest of it would have to wait. The chest tube procedure took 11 minutes. Maya worked secondary, instruments, position, pressure monitoring, and she did it with the specific economy of motion that you couldn't fake. You either had the training in your hands or you didn't, and she had it in hers in a way that came from somewhere other than 3 years in a military hospital ER. Darnell noticed. The tech from respiratory noticed. The military man in the dark jacket, standing just outside the bay with the Malinois sitting perfectly still at his heel, did not take his eyes off her hands. The hemothorax was significant, almost 800 milliliters out in the first drainage, and the patient's pressure came up as the blood cleared. Not all the way, not clean, but enough. His color improved. His breathing deepened. The monitor's tone shifted from the particular urgency of deterioration to something closer to stability. Dr. Chu called it. "He's holding. Let's get him up to surgical for the vessel work." The surgical team arrived fast, and the stretcher moved. Maya stepped back, stripped her gloves, and stood at the sink washing her hands while the room reorganized itself around the departure. She was aware of Hale. She didn't look at him. She heard him cross the floor toward her. "My office," he said. "After your shift." "Yes, sir." That was a significant breach of, "I know." "You do not," he said, low and tight, "interrupt a physician's assessment in my ER. I don't care what instinct you think you had. You are a nurse. You assist. You do not lead." She turned to look at him then. She had been working very hard all evening to keep her face composed, and she was mostly successful, but there was something in his tone, the certainty of it, the pleasure under the certainty, that made something slip just slightly. "He's alive," she said. "That is not the point." "With respect," she said, and she was careful, she was precise. "I think it might be." He looked at her for a long moment. "Be in my office at 8. He left. She turned back to the sink. Behind her, she heard footsteps, measured, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that came from someone who had spent time on uneven terrain. She didn't turn around. She heard the click of nails on the floor, the Malinois, moving to sit behind her left heel with the specific positioning of a working dog who had just decided she was not a threat. "That's unusual," the man said. She looked down at the dog, then up at the man. Up close, he was mid-40s, weathered in the way that came from outside rather than age, with eyes that were doing exactly what she thought they were doing, assessing. "She doesn't settle for strangers," he said. "I don't have anything she wants," Maya said. "That's not usually why she does it." He tilted his head slightly. "Commander Rafe Solis, SEAL Team 8. Maya Carter, Trauma RN." He nodded, and the nod had the particular quality of someone confirming something they already suspected rather than acknowledging new information. "The drainage volume you called," he said. "The lateral pressure assessment before imaging." He paused. "That's not hospital training." She dried her hands on a paper towel and threw it in the bin. "I've had good teachers." "I've seen that assessment technique one other time," Solis said. "Kandahar, 2019. A forward surgical team that was working out of a FOB with no imaging capability and 3 times the caseload they should have had." She said nothing. "The person who taught it to them," he said, "went by a different name than Maya Carter." She looked at him directly then. He met it without moving. "Sergeant Torres is going to be all right?" she asked. It was a deflection, and they both knew it, but Solis accepted it. If the surgical team is half as good as you were in that bay, yes. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. No rank printed on it. No unit. Just a phone number and a single line of text she recognized as a clearance notation. The people I work with are going to want to talk to you. She took the card. Dr. Hale's going to fire me tonight, she said. It came out without self-pity, just flat, the way you say something you've already processed. Yes, Solis said. I know. And then quieter. So do we. She looked at the card, at the notation, at the number. The Malinois pressed her head briefly against Maya's knee, then moved back to Solis's heel. Down the corridor, the surgical elevator doors opened and closed, taking Sergeant Torres up toward an OR, where people were going to spend the next several hours putting back together what a gunshot had taken apart. Maya had done what she could do. The rest was out of her hands. At the nursing station, her computer showed 3 new documentation alerts and a flag on her file she hadn't put there. She went back to work. Hale's office at 8 p.m. was small and aggressively organized. Plaques on the wall, framed letters of commendation. A photograph of him shaking hands with the hospital administrator at some event 3 years ago. He sat behind his desk with a personnel file open in front of him that Maya recognized as hers. She did not sit. He hadn't offered. 3 years, he said. Clean record. Good patient satisfaction scores. He looked up. And tonight you overrode a physician's assessment in a trauma situation in front of military personnel and the rest of my staff. I offered a clinical observation. Dr. Chu made the call. You went to the supply tech for equipment before the attending authorized the procedure. There was a 6-second window where I believed, you believed. He closed the file. Maya, you're a good nurse. That's not what this is about. What this is about is institutional hierarchy and why it exists. You cannot have floor nurses making independent tactical decisions in a trauma bay. That is how patients die. Or, she said carefully, that is how they live. He looked at her. Sergeant Torres's pressure was 68 and dropping, she said. The delay for imaging would have been, at minimum, 8 minutes. The drainage volume was... I've seen the chart. Then you've seen that the intervention was appropriate. Hale leaned back in his chair and did the thing she'd noticed he did when he was about to say something he'd already decided. He breathed out slowly through his nose, like he was demonstrating patience. I'm suspending you, he said. 2 weeks, pending a formal review of tonight's events and the Darrow case from this afternoon. You'll surrender your access badge on the way out. She had known it was coming. She had known it was coming since the moment she asked Darnell for the chest tube tray. Maybe since the moment she said imaging delays intervention in a room full of witnesses. Maybe since James Darrow came in at noon and she had pushed the way she'd pushed, and it hadn't been enough. The Darrow case, she said, I want the documentation reviewed, all of it. My timestamps, my escalation notes. That's what the review process is for. I escalated to Dr. Vaught, twice. That's in the record. He met her eyes. Something in his face shifted. Small, almost imperceptible, but she'd been reading people professionally for a long time and she caught it. The particular micro-expression of a man who knows there's a gap in the story he's been telling. Surrender your badge at the desk, he said. She walked out of his office, down the corridor, past the nursing station where 2 people she'd worked with for 3 years looked away when she came through. She stopped at the desk, unclipped her badge, set it down. Darnell was at the end of the counter. He looked at the badge, then at her. That's not right, he said quietly. No, she agreed. She picked up her bag from her locker, pulled on her jacket, and walked out through the ambulance bay into the Oregon rain. The military vehicles were still in the lot, 2 of them, marked with designations she wasn't supposed to be able to read. A uniformed figure was standing near the larger vehicle, on a phone call, and when she passed, he didn't look up. But the Malinois, secured in the vehicle's side run, pressed her nose against the grate and tracked Maya all the way to the edge of the parking lot. Maya stopped at her car, put her hand on the roof, and stood there in the rain for a long moment, not moving. The cold worked into the collar of her jacket and the back of her neck, and she let it, because being cold was real and specific and easier to hold on to than the things that were moving in her chest right now. 3 years of holding it together, 3 years of being the quiet one, the reliable one, The one who did the work and didn't ask for recognition and kept her head down and her record clean. 3 years of being the nurse that people didn't look twice at, and she had managed it because she had needed to manage it, because the alternative was letting the other thing be visible, and she was not ready for the other thing to be visible. She had been so close. She reached into her jacket pocket, Solis's card. She turned it over once. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Carter. A woman's voice. Direct, no preamble. My name is Agent Petra Voss. I'm with the Office of Special Investigations. I'm calling because we've been watching Redwood Valley Military Medical Center for 6 months, and you just walked into the middle of something you don't have full context on. A pause. Neither do we. But you're going to want to come in. Maya looked at the card in her hand, looked at the hospital behind her, lit up floor by floor in the rain. How did you get this number? She asked. The same way we got your file. Another pause. Your real file. The rain came down harder. The military vehicles sat in the lot, patient and dark. Where? Maya said. There's a coffee shop on Burnside, Alara's. We'll be inside. The call ended. She sat in her car for 30 seconds with the phone in her lap and the rain loud on the roof. Then she started the engine. Alara's was 8 minutes from the hospital, a narrow place wedged between a print shop and a pharmacy, the kind of coffee shop that had been there long enough that nobody had to ask where it was anymore. Maya parked half a block up and walked in without checking if anyone had followed her, because if the woman on the phone was who she said she was, checking would have been theater. The woman was already there. Corner booth, back to the wall, a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Early 40s, short dark hair, a jacket that was nondescript in the specific way that said someone had thought about it. Across from her sat a man Maya didn't recognize. Younger, maybe 35, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm but from training. Maya slid into the booth. You said 6 months, she said. Petra Voss looked at her with the particular attention of someone who had been given a file and was now checking the file against the person. Redwood Valley has been flagged for a series of patient outcome irregularities over the last 14 months. Cross-referenced with insurance billing anomalies, medication inventory discrepancies, and 2 formal complaints from staff members who both subsequently resigned. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The complaints named Dr. Victor Hale. What kind of irregularities? The billing kind that required the clinical record to look different than what actually happened. Voss paused. And tonight, you handed us the clearest pattern match we've had. The man across from Voss hadn't moved. Maya looked at him. Agent Darren Kolb, he said. I've read your service record. Which one? Both of them, he said, and he said it without any particular weight, which somehow gave it more. Maya looked at the table. The coffee shop was quiet. 2 people at the counter, a barista cleaning something behind the espresso machine. Nobody paying attention to their booth. She had spent 3 years curating invisibility, and here she was in the corner of a coffee shop on Burnside with 2 federal investigators who had apparently known about her since before she knew about them. Hale suspended me tonight, she said. Formal review. He's going to use the Darrow case as the framework. We know. Voss reached into her bag and produced a manila folder, the physical kind, which told Maya this was the kind of meeting where nothing was going on a shared server. She opened it and turned it so Maya could read. James Darrow's clinical record was amended, twice. The timestamps don't match the original nursing documentation. Maya went still. She looked at the amended entries. Her escalation note, the one she'd entered at 14:04, flagging the atypical presentation to Dr. Vaught, had been backdated. The new entry said 14:31, 27 minutes later, after the window where intervention would have changed the trajectory of Darrow's deterioration. Someone changed the time, Maya said. Someone with attending-level system access, Voss said, which narrows the field considerably. Vaught, Maya said. Voss didn't confirm it, she didn't deny it either, and that was its own answer. We need the original chart entry. You documented in real time. We've verified that from the system's audit log, which Hale apparently didn't know we could pull. Your original timestamp is still in the back-end record. Then you have it. We have evidence. We don't have testimony yet. The backdating creates reasonable deniability unless someone on the clinical side can speak to the original sequence of events, the specific presentation, the escalation protocol as it actually happened. Voss looked at her steadily. We need you. You need me to be a witness in an investigation of the hospital where I just got suspended and where Hale is already building a case against my clinical judgment. Yes. Maya sat with that. What does this have to do with Sergeant Torres? She asked. It was the question she'd been sitting with since the military convoy rolled through the ambulance bay doors. Voss and Kolb exchanged a look that lasted maybe a half second. Long enough. Torres's unit was returning from an operation that Redwood Valley was designated to support as the Regional Military Medical Facility, Kolb said. The protocol for classified casualty intake requires a specific trauma team with appropriate clearances. Instead, Torres arrived at a trauma base staffed by personnel who were not on that protocol list. He paused. Someone adjusted the duty roster 14 hours before the convoy arrived. Maya felt something settle in her chest. Not calm. The opposite. The specific alertness that came when a pattern came together. Hale adjusted it, she said. We believe so. Kolb leaned forward slightly. What we don't know yet is whether it was negligence or intent. What's the difference? About 20 years of federal sentencing guidelines, Voss said flatly. Outside, a bus went past, its lights sweeping across the window. Maya watched it go. I didn't ask to get pulled into this, she said. No, Voss agreed, but you were in that trauma bay tonight. You made the call that kept Torres alive long enough to get to surgery. And you have a background that means you understood exactly what you were seeing when you walked into that room. She closed the folder. You were already in it, Carter. We're just telling you the shape of the room. Maya looked at the card in her hand, Solis's card, which she'd been holding since the parking lot without realizing it. She set it on the table. Voss glanced at it. Commander Solis already briefed us. Of course he did, Maya said. She stood up. Voss looked up at her without alarm. I need to think, Maya said. We have time. Voss reached into the folder and produced a second card, smaller, with a number in handwriting rather than print. Not unlimited time, but some. Maya took the card. She walked out into the rain. She didn't go home. She drove east on Burnside and then north without a destination, the kind of driving that was really just moving, putting space between herself and the decisions she wasn't ready to make yet. The radio was off. The rain was consistent and impersonal against the windshield. She had come to Portland 3 years ago with a specific plan. Not a plan she'd written down or told anyone, but a plan with a shape to it. Find a position somewhere institutional and quiet, somewhere her training would be useful but not visible, somewhere she could do the work without the work becoming a story. She had picked Redwood Valley partly for the military affiliation. She knew that environment, knew how to move in it, and partly because Portland was large enough that she could be invisible in it without trying too hard. It had worked. For 3 years it had worked. She thought about the SEAL's face when he'd looked at her. You know this procedure, don't you? Like he'd been waiting for confirmation of something he already knew. Like she'd been walking through his hospital room for 3 years and he'd just noticed her name tag. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced at it. Darnell's name on the screen. She let it go to voicemail, then picked it up at the next red light and listened. Maya. I don't know what's going on exactly, but I pulled Darrow's chart after you left and something's wrong with the timestamps. My entry and yours don't line up anymore, and I know they did when I checked at end of shift because I always check before I sign off. A pause, and she heard him breathing in the way that meant he was making a decision about how much to say. I saved a screenshot. I don't know if that helps anything, but I've got it. Call me. She called him back immediately. He picked up on the first ring. Hey. Don't send that screenshot to anyone, she said. Don't email it. Don't text it. Keep it on your personal phone and don't mention it to anyone at the hospital. Maya, what is... I'll explain when I can. Right now I need you to trust me, and I need you to keep that image somewhere safe. A long pause. Rain on the windows, the tick of her turn signal. Okay, Darnell said. She exhaled. Thank you. She hung up and drove another 4 blocks before she pulled into a parking lot. The back of a hardware store, closed for the night, orange light pooling on wet asphalt, and sat with the engine running and the heater working on the chill in her hands. She pulled out the card with the handwritten number. Then she pulled out Solis's card. She looked at both of them. The problem with the plan she'd built was that it had required everything to stay in its lane. Hale to be a bureaucratic annoyance and nothing more. Her background to stay background. The hospital to be a place where she did the work and went home, and the work didn't come looking for her. Torres's convoy had walked through the door, and none of it was in its lane anymore. She called Voss's number. I need to know one thing, she said when Voss picked up. The mission Torres's unit was returning from. Was anyone else hurt? A pause. 2 members of his team are at a facility in Washington. Non-critical. The K-9? Fine. She nodded, alone in her car. Okay, she said. I'm in. Depart. She was back at her apartment by 10:30. She did not sleep well. That was not new, had not been new in a long time. And by 5 a.m., she was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 years of painstaking documentation spread across the screen. Her own records. Every escalation note, every chart entry, every time she'd flagged something and who she'd flagged it to and what had happened after. She had kept copies not because she'd been planning for this specific scenario, but because she had learned in the work she'd done before this work that the person who could prove what actually happened was always the person who'd kept the receipts. There were 11 instances in 3 years where her escalation notes had resulted in attending intervention that deviated from her documented recommendation. Not a suspicious number on its own. Physicians made independent calls, that was the system. But 7 of those 11 cases had involved patients covered by a specific military insurance contractor. And in 4 of those 7 cases, the outcomes had been worse than her documented projections. She wrote it out. Long form, dated, precise. Not for Voss yet. For herself. Because she needed to understand the shape of what she was looking at before she handed it to anyone else. And she needed to understand it in a way that didn't have gaps someone could drive a truck through. At 7:15, her phone rang. Not Voss, not Darnell, not a number she recognized. She answered. Carter? Solis? Torres is out of surgery. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. How is he? Stable. Surgeon says the chest tube call kept him from going into arrest in the OR. A brief pause. He's asking for you. I'm suspended from the hospital. I know. Another pause, and she heard ambient noise behind him. The kind of ambient noise that meant he was in a facility rather than outside. There are ways around that, if you're willing. What ways? Torres has the right to request a specific medical contact during his recovery. As a SEAL casualty, that request goes through the unit's command structure, not the hospital administration. She heard the particular flatness in his voice that meant he was choosing words carefully. Hale would be notified, but it's not his call to block. She thought about what that looked like. Hale receiving a formal request through military channels to reinstate her access for a specific patient. Hale's face. The calculation he would make. He'll use it, she said, in the review. He'll say I'm leveraging a patient relationship. Let him. Solis didn't say it harshly. He said it the way someone said something when they had already thought through the downstream and didn't find it concerning. Carter, I have 8 years of reading people, and I've been watching you since you walked into that trauma bay. You didn't save Torres because you were leveraging anything. You saved him because you couldn't not. She was quiet. He wants to thank you, Solis said, and I think you need to hear what he has to say. She looked at the documentation spread across her kitchen table, the evidence that had been there for 3 years sitting in her files, not because she'd been building a case, but because she'd been being thorough. The way she'd always been thorough. The way you learned to be thorough when the cost of missing something was someone's life. What time? She said. 9. I'll be there. She hung up, went to the window, and looked out at Portland in the gray morning. The rain had stopped sometime in the night. The streets were wet and quiet. Somewhere across the city, in Redwood Valley's surgical recovery ward, a Navy SEAL was awake and asking for the nurse who'd put her career on the line to keep him breathing. And in an office on the third floor of that same building, a man was looking at her file and figuring out how to make sure she never walked back through those doors. She had 8 years of reading people, too. She knew which one of those was more dangerous. Redwood Valley's visitor entrance at 9 a.m. was staffed by a single security officer who checked credentials with the particular bored efficiency of someone doing a job they'd done 10,000 times. Maya presented her ID and the authorization form Solis had sent to her phone 40 minutes earlier. A military medical access request, formatted correctly, with the right stamps and the right chain of command signatures. The officer looked at it, looked at her ID, typed something, and handed her a visitor badge without blinking. She clipped it to her jacket and walked in. The surgical recovery ward was on the 4th floor, separated from the main clinical area by a set of badge access doors that her visitor authorization unlocked. The floor was quieter than the ER, monitored hustle rather than reactive chaos, the specific rhythm of a space where the crisis had passed and the long work of repair was underway. A nurse at the station looked up when Maya came through. Maya kept moving. Room 412 had a uniformed guard outside it. He checked the authorization form without expression, nodded, and stepped aside. Torres was propped at 30 degrees, which was the only configuration that made sense given the chest tube site and the surgical repair underneath. He was still big, still obviously built for physical work that most people never did, but with the particular diminishment of someone who had just had their body put back together against its will. His color was better than it had been in the trauma bay. His eyes were clearer. In the chair beside the bed, the Malinois lay with her head on her forepaws, watching the door. She raised her head when Maya came in and her tail moved once, twice, and went still. "She remembers you," Torres said. His voice was rough from intubation. "How are you feeling?" Maya asked, which was a clinical question, but also just a human one, and she asked it because she wanted to know. "Like I got shot," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. The effort it would have taken. "They tell me you made the call on the chest tube." "Dr. Chu made the call." "Chu said you pushed for it." Maya sat down in the chair across from him, on the other side of the bed from the dog. The clinical picture was clear. "To you." He looked at her steadily. The clarity in his eyes was specific, not just alert, but the kind of alert that meant he was putting things together. "I've had 2 chest wounds in 12 years of service. I know what the procedure is supposed to look like. I know how long it takes a civilian trauma team to organize themselves for it." He paused to breathe carefully, managing the pull against the surgical site. "You were ready before they called it. You had the technique before the attending confirmed. That's not what ER nurses learn." She said nothing. "I'm not asking for your file," he said. "I'm not asking what your name was before it was Carter, or where you did the work that gave you those hands." He kept looking at her, direct, without pressure. "I'm asking you one thing." She waited. "Whatever it is that made you want to be invisible," he said, "is it still out there? The thing you were hiding from?" The room was very quiet. The Malinois breathed slowly. Down the corridor, a monitor pulsed its steady tone. Maya looked at her hands, steadier than most people's hands. She had always had steady hands, even when everything else in a situation was coming apart. "No," she said. "Then stop hiding," Torres said. Simple, direct. The way special operations people said things when they meant them, without decoration or softening. She was trying to formulate an answer that wasn't either a deflection or more truth than she'd given anyone in 3 years when the door opened behind her. She turned. Dr. Victor Hale stood in the doorway. He was in his white coat, his badge visible, his face doing the careful neutral of someone who was very angry and had decided not to show it. Behind him was a woman Maya didn't recognize, administrative lanyard, clipboard, the look of someone from hospital legal or compliance. "Ms. Carter," Hale said. The miss was deliberate. "You've been suspended from clinical duty pending a formal review. Your presence in a patient room is a violation of—" "I have a military medical access authorization," Maya said. She was still seated. She didn't stand up, and she noticed that she was making a choice not to stand up, and was comfortable with that choice. "Issued through the patient's unit command. I believe you were notified this morning." A notification is not a waiver of hospital policy during a disciplinary proceeding. I'd check the military medical statutes on that, she said, specifically the section on command-authorized consultations for active duty casualties. Hale's jaw tightened. The woman behind him wrote something on her clipboard. Torres spoke from the bed. His voice was still rough, but it carried. Dr. Hale? Hale looked at him. Ms. Carter is here at my request, authorized through my command structure. Torres didn't move, didn't shift his posture, didn't do anything that could be read as threatening. He just stated it the way he'd state a set of coordinates, factual, non-negotiable. I'd appreciate you leaving us to finish our conversation. Hale looked at Torres, at Maya, at the Malinois, who had raised her head and was watching him with amber eyes that were doing the dog equivalent of exactly what Torres was doing. The review process will address all of this, Hale said, to Maya specifically, including this visit. He left. The door didn't slam. He was too controlled for that, but it closed with a firmness that said everything the slam would have. Maya exhaled once, short and quiet. Torres looked at her. He's scared, he said. He's been scared for a while, she said. He just didn't think it was of me. The Malinois put her head back down on her forepaws. Torres watched Maya with the specific look of someone reclassifying something in a category they were still building. Solis told me about the investigators, he said. She looked at him. Whatever they need from you, he said, we'll back it, officially, in writing, on record. He paused to manage his breathing again. The people who put me in that bay without the right team, I want to know what that was, and I want it to have consequences. His monitor pulsed. The room held its quiet. Maya's phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. Voss. She showed Torres the name without explaining it. Take it, he said. She stepped into the corridor, past the guard, and answered. We have a problem, Voss said, and the specific flatness of her voice made the hair on Maya's neck stand up. Hale made 2 calls this morning from his office landline, one to the hospital's legal team, one to a number that's registered to a private consulting firm that we've been watching for 4 months in a separate investigation. Maya stood very still in the 4th floor corridor, visitor badge on her jacket. The door to room 412 closed behind her. What kind of consulting firm? She said. The kind that specializes in making witness problems go away before they reach a courtroom, Voss said. Carter, we need to move faster than we planned. Down the corridor, the elevator opened and 2 men in civilian clothes stepped out, moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with visiting a patient. Maya watched them. They hadn't seen her yet. Voss, she said quietly. I think they're already moving. The 2 men hadn't seen her yet, but they were going to in about 4 seconds. Maya turned away from them, phone still at her ear, and walked toward the nursing station at a pace that was fast enough to create distance, but not so fast it registered as flight. They're on the 4th floor, she said quietly. Surgical recovery. 2 of them, civilian clothes, no badges visible. Moving like they have a destination. Don't engage, Voss said. Where are you exactly? Corridor outside 412, about 20 meters from the station. Is there another exit off that floor? Staff stairwell at the end of the east wing. Badge access, but my visitor authorization should work. Go there. Don't go back into Torres's room. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard the men's footsteps slow, and she knew without looking that they'd clocked the room number and were stopping. Good. That meant they weren't following her. That meant Torres was the target, or the leverage point, not her, which was its own problem. They're stopping at 412, she said. Kolb is 3 minutes out, Voss said. He's got credentials that will get them removed. Keep moving. She reached the stairwell door, pressed her visitor badge to the reader, and heard the click of the lock disengaging. She pushed through into the concrete quiet of the stairwell and kept moving down. Voss. The guard outside Torres's room was uniformed security, not military police. Hale could have him rotated out. Solis is already in the building. We called him before we called you. Maya stopped on the 3rd floor landing. How long have you been running this in parallel? A pause that was 1 beat too long. Long enough. She pushed through the 3rd floor door and came out into a corridor she knew well. This was the level directly above the ER, where the step-down units ran, where she'd walked 100 times during the past 3 years carrying labs and transfer paperwork and the various small burdens of institutional medicine. She knew which way the cameras pointed. She turned left. "I need to know something," she said. "The consulting firm Hale called. Does it have a name?" "Viridian Advisory Group." She filed it. "And the separate investigation, what were they being watched for?" "Witness interference. Twice in the last 2 years, individuals who were material to federal healthcare fraud cases developed sudden problems. One lost her nursing license on a manufactured complaint. One had a break-in that targeted only his work files. Nothing we could prosecute, but the pattern was clear." Voss's voice was flat and even. "Hale's call to them this morning is the first direct link between Viridian and this facility." Maya walked. She was thinking about Darnell's screenshot, about her own documentation on her laptop at home, about the audit log Voss said existed in the system's backend. "The audit log," she said. "The one with my original timestamp. How secure is it?" "Server side. Hale can't touch it without IT involvement and a specific kind of elevated access." "Does he have that access?" A longer pause this time. "We're checking." She stopped walking. "Voss, if he has it, we know." The words came fast and tight. "We're pulling it now. But Carter, this is why we need you to come in today. We need your testimony on record before anything else moves. You're the anchor of the clinical timeline, and if that log gets compromised—" "I have documentation at home," Maya said. 3 years of it. My own records, contemporaneous, dated, saved locally. Not just the Darrow case." She paused. 11 cases. Specific patterns. Silence on the line. Then, "You've been building a record." "I've been keeping thorough notes," she said. "There's a difference." "Not in a courtroom," Voss said. And for the first time since the coffee shop on Burnside, she sounded like something other than controlled. She sounded like someone who had just been handed something she needed. "We need those files, Carter. Physical copies and digital. Can you get home in the next hour?" "Yes." "Kolb will meet you there. Text me your address." She was already moving toward the main elevator bank. She was 12 minutes from her apartment when her phone rang again. Not Voss. Darnell. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" "Someone from hospital compliance just called me." His voice was careful in the way it got when he was trying to sound normal and wasn't succeeding. "Asked me to come in for a conversation about the Darrow chart. Today. In an hour." Maya felt the shape of it clearly. The compliance call to Darnell was pressure, not because they knew about the screenshot, but because Hale knew Darnell had been present for the chart documentation and would know if something had changed. "Did they say what specifically?" she asked. "Something about verifying my documentation sequence." "Maya, they're not supposed to call staff in for informal conversations during a review. That's not protocol." "No," she said. "It's not. Should I go?" She thought about it, thought about the screenshot on his phone and what happened to material evidence if the person holding it walked into a room with hospital legal without knowing what the room was actually for. "Do you have a union rep?" she asked. "Yeah." "Call them before you go anywhere, right now. Tell them you received a request for an informal compliance interview and you want representation present." She paused. "Don't mention the screenshot. Don't mention me." "Maya, I know. I'll explain everything when I can. Right now, call your rep." She hung up and pressed the accelerator a fraction harder than she needed to. At her apartment, she moved fast but not panicked. The documentation was organized because she always kept it organized. A habit from the other life where disorganization got people killed. She pulled the external hard drive from the fireproof box under her bed, the one that looked like it contained tax records and effectively did as camouflage, and loaded it onto her kitchen table next to the printed files she'd pulled that morning. Then she photographed every page with her phone as a redundant copy. Kolb knocked at the door 11 minutes after she arrived. He came in, looked at the table, and went quiet for a moment in the way that people went quiet when something was bigger than they'd anticipated. "This is 3 years," he said. "I'm a thorough person." He sat down and started reading. She made coffee because her hands needed something to do, and because it was 9:40 in the morning and she'd been awake since before 5 and the day was not close to over. Kolb read in silence for a long time. She didn't rush him. She knew what the files said and she knew what they meant, and she wanted him to arrive at that on his own, rather than being directed there by her, because that was how evidence worked when you wanted it to hold up. 4 of these cases, he said finally. The outcomes. Yes. You documented deterioration patterns that were inconsistent with the attending notes. I documented what I observed. The attending notes are their own documents. He looked up at her. Did you ever consider filing a formal complaint? I filed 2 informal safety reports in year 1. They were reviewed by the department head. The department head at that time was Hale. She picked up her coffee. In year 2, one of the other nurses who'd flagged similar concerns transferred out after a performance review that didn't match her actual record. I watched what happened to her, and I made a decision. To keep your head down. To keep my documentation current, she said. There's a difference. Kolb held her look for a beat. Not much of one. Enough of one, she said, that I'm sitting here with 3 years of evidence instead of a revoked license and a sealed complaint. He went back to reading. Her phone buzzed. Voss. Kolb with you? She replied. Yes. He's reviewing. Voss. Good. We have a problem at the hospital. Call when you can. She called. The 2 men on the 4th floor, Voss said. They're from Viridian. We confirmed it. They identified themselves to Torres's guard as insurance representatives for the hospital's liability coverage. The guard let them in before Kolb's credentials arrived. Maya felt something cold move through her. They were in Torres's room? For approximately 4 minutes before Kolb and Solis got them out. Torres is fine. He told them nothing, which is not surprising given what he does for a living, but the fact that they got in means Hale moved faster than we expected. A pause. He knows we're building something. We don't know yet how he knows. Or he just got scared and reached for the most available tool, Maya said. Scared people don't always have complete information. They just act. Maybe. Voss didn't sound convinced. Either way, we're moving the formal interview to today. We need your testimony on record before anything else changes. Can you be at our field office at 2 p.m.? Yes. Bring everything on that table. The OSI field office in Portland was not a place that announced itself. It occupied the 4th floor of a building near the Pearl District that mostly housed accounting firms and a small architecture practice. And the only indication that anything federal happened there was the security panel at the elevator and the specific quality of the carpet, which had the ageless institutional blankness of government procurement. Voss met her in the corridor. Kolb had arrived ahead of Maya with the files, which were already spread across a conference table when she walked in. There was a third person in the room she hadn't seen before, a woman in her 50s with silver hair cut short and reading glasses pushed up on her head, who looked up from a document when Maya entered. Dr. Rosalind Marsh, Voss said. She's the federal healthcare fraud examiner assigned to this case. She's been working the Viridian thread for 8 months. Marsh looked at Maya the way Voss had looked at her in the coffee shop, taking inventory. Sit down, Ms. Carter. We have a lot to cover. The next 2.5 hours were not comfortable. Marsh was thorough in a way that felt less like collaboration and more like excavation, asking Maya to walk through specific chart entries, specific escalation sequences, specific moments of clinical decision-making over 3 years, and asking follow-up questions that were precise enough to tell Maya that Marsh had read a significant portion of the documentation before this meeting and was checking Maya's account against it rather than simply receiving information. It was the right approach. Maya understood the right approach. It didn't make it less exhausting. Halfway through, Marsh stopped and looked at her over the reading glasses she'd pulled back down. You said Hale reviewed your 2 informal safety reports personally. Yes. And you have the acknowledgement receipts from that review. In the files, tab 7. Marsh found tab 7, read it. These are signed by Hale. His system login. The signature is electronic, but the audit trail on the document system shows it was his credentials. Marsh set the file down and looked at Voss. Something passed between them that Maya couldn't fully read but registered as significant. What? Maya said. The same credentials, Marsh said, appear in the audit log for the Darrow chart amendment. The room was very quiet. He changed it himself, Maya said. We believe so. Marsh took off her reading glasses entirely. Miss Carter, the picture that's developing here is larger than one physician's misconduct and one altered chart. The pattern across your 11 cases, cross-referenced with the billing anomalies we've been tracking and the Viridian connection, suggests that Redwood Valley has been operating a systematic protocol deviation scheme, managing patient outcomes to fit insurance reimbursement targets, altering documentation to cover adverse events, and using Viridian to handle anyone who noticed. She paused. Dr. Hale is either the architect or the primary implementer. We're not yet certain which. Who's above him? Maya asked. Marsh looked at her steadily. That's what we're trying to determine. Maya sat with that for a moment. Then, the roster change. For Torres's convoy intake. Someone at an administrative level had to authorize that. Yes. Hale's not administrative level. He's clinical leadership. No, Marsh said. He's not. She looked at Voss again. We're going to need to move on the administrator's office before end of business today. Voss nodded. I'll make the call. But Maya left the field office at 4:30 with an evidence receipt, a non-disclosure protocol she'd already understood without being asked, and the specific heaviness that came from spending 2.5 hours handing over something she'd been carrying alone for a long time. It wasn't relief exactly. More like the feeling after you'd been holding tension in a muscle for so long you'd stopped noticing it, and then it released, and the release hurt in its own way. She drove back toward Redwood Valley not because she was supposed to, but because she needed to see the building. That was an irrational impulse, and she recognized it as irrational. And she went anyway, parking across the street and sitting with the engine off, and looking at the building she'd walked into every day for 3 years. Her phone buzzed. Solis. Where are you? He said. Across the street from the hospital. A brief pause. You should go home, Carter. Probably. She watched the ambulance bay. A unit pulled out, lights going, running a call. Normal operations. The building didn't look like a place where anything was wrong, and it never had. That was the thing about places where things were wrong. They looked exactly like places where things were fine. Torres wanted me to tell you something, Solis said. She waited. He said, and I'm quoting exactly because he was specific about this, tell her I know who she was, and that person is not something to run from. A pause. I don't know the full context of that, but he was clear about wanting you to have it. She looked at the hospital. He means I should stop pretending the other life didn't happen. I think that's what he means, yeah. She almost said something about how easy that sounded from someone who hadn't made the specific choices she'd made. But Torres had made choices too, the kind that left exit wounds you couldn't document, and he wasn't hiding from his, so she kept it. Solis, she said. The administrator. Hale's above him or below him? Below. No hesitation. Hale's the one who gets his hands dirty. The administrator, Gerald Fitch, is the one who decides what the hands get dirty doing. Gerald Fitch. She filed the name. How long have you known about Fitch? Long enough that this morning's call to Viridian didn't surprise me. His voice was careful. What surprised me was the speed. They moved to Viridian within 2 hours of us showing credentials on the 4th floor. That kind of speed suggests Fitch was already in contact with them before today, before Torres's convoy arrived. Yes, she felt the shape of that settling into place and did not like the shape. Solis, was the roster change for the convoy intake? Was it just negligence? Hale wanting to control who was in the trauma bay? A long silence. The kind of silence that wasn't hesitation, but decision. We're not certain, he said. That's not a no. No, he said. It's not. She sat with that. Outside, the ambulance bay absorbed another incoming unit, a different crew. The ordinary volume of a city's emergencies flowing through a single building. She thought about Torres on that stretcher, gray and bleeding, packed in the field by people who knew what they were doing, and then loaded into a facility where the roster had been adjusted 14 hours in advance. If it wasn't negligence, she said, then the person who changed that roster knew Torres's unit was coming back compromised. Yes, which means someone at Redwood Valley had access to classified convoy information. Yes. That's not healthcare fraud, she said. No, Solis said. It's not. The line went quiet. She heard him breathing on the other end, measured and deliberate, The breathing of someone in a situation that was actively developing and required steadiness. "Carter," he said, "I need you to go home. Lock your door. Don't make any calls except to Voss or me. I need you to do that right now." "What's happening?" Fitch's office issued a statement 20 minutes ago. He's calling a formal institutional review of the overnight incidents, framing it as a patient safety initiative. A pause. "And he's named you as a person of interest in the potential compromise of a classified military medical protocol." The words landed with the flat, specific impact of something that had been aimed. "He's flipping it," she said. "He's trying to. He's turning me into the problem." "He's trying to," Solis said again. "Carter, go home." She started the engine. The hospital receded in her rearview mirror as she pulled out, floor by floor, lit up and busy and absolutely ordinary looking. And somewhere inside it, a man was signing his name to a statement that was designed to make her the story instead of him. She drove 3 blocks before she realized she was being followed. It wasn't dramatic. No black SUV, no aggressive tailgating, just a gray sedan 2 cars back that had made the same 3 turns she had, sitting at exactly the distance that looked like traffic, and wasn't. She'd learned to notice that in a place very different from Portland, in a time she'd been trying to leave behind, and the noticing came back without effort. She didn't call Solis. She called Voss. "I have a tail," she said. "Gray sedan, partial plate November 7? Maya checked her mirror. "Yes?" "That's ours," Voss said. "We put it on you after the field office. Carter." And here the controlled flatness in Voss's voice cracked, just slightly, just for a second. Fitch made a second call from his office line 20 minutes ago. Not to Viridian this time. Maya waited. "To the state medical board," Voss said. "He filed an emergency complaint against your nursing license, alleged clinical misconduct, falsification of records, and unauthorized patient contact." A pause. "The board has to acknowledge it within 48 hours. If they open a formal inquiry, your license is suspended pending review. That's automatic." Maya's hands were steady on the wheel. They were always steady. She drove. "That's his play," she said. "If my license is suspended, my testimony in the OSI case is compromised. A nurse under active board investigation is a less credible witness." "Yes." "So we have 48 hours. "Less," Voss said. "The board has emergency provisions. If Fitch has contacts there." "Does he?" A pause that confirmed it before the words did. "He was on the board's advisory committee for 3 years, stepped down last spring." Maya turned onto her street. The gray sedan stayed 2 cars back, patient and present. "Voss," she said, "I have documentation that covers 4 of Fitch's advisory years, including 2 cases where his committee reviewed complaints against Redwood Valley physicians and dismissed them." She pulled into her parking space. "Including 1 complaint against Hale." Silence. "You have that," Voss said. It was not quite a question. "Tab 14, she said. "I didn't know what it meant when I filed it. I was being thorough." She killed the engine. "I think I know what it means now." She heard Voss pull a breath in and let it out slowly. "We need to move up the arrest timeline," Voss said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone shifting from investigation mode to action. "If Fitch moves on the board before we can serve him, we lose the window." A pause. "I have to make calls. Go inside. Don't open the door for anyone except the gray sedan team." "Understood." She got out of the car, looked up at her apartment building, 3 floors of ordinary windows in the Portland gray. She had lived here for 3 years, and she had never once thought about what it would look like to someone watching it from the outside. She was thinking about it now. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer, but she noted the time, 5:12 p.m. Then it rang again. Same unknown number. She let it go again. The third call, 30 seconds later, she answered because 3 calls from an unknown number in 90 seconds was a message. Not a coincidence. Silence on the line. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Male, unhurried, with the particular flatness of someone who had practiced not sounding threatening. "Ms. Carter, we understand you met with federal investigators today." She said nothing. She was standing in the parking lot, not moving toward the building. "We're not here to cause problems," the voice said. "We'd just like an opportunity to discuss what you shared with them and whether there's a version of this situation that works better for everyone. She understood exactly what this was. She had understood it before he finished the first sentence. She just needed to hear it said. "I think we're past that point," she said. "I don't think you've thought carefully about the implications for your license," he said. "Your career. The people around you who might get pulled into a federal investigation they didn't ask for." A brief pause. Darnell Washington, for example. She went very still. The parking lot was quiet around her. "He seems like a good person," the voice said. "Be a shame if his documentation practices came under scrutiny." The call ended. Maya stood in the parking lot for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and looked directly at the gray sedan, which was parked at the end of the block. Engine running, the team inside it certainly watching her and certainly having recorded that call if they were doing their job correctly. She walked to the sedan. The passenger window came down. The agent inside was young, maybe 28, with the look of someone who had been told to sit here and watch and was taking it seriously. "Did you record that call?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Get it to Voss in the next 10 minutes. She straightened up. "And tell her they just threatened a witness." She walked into her building. Behind her, the agent was already on his radio, and somewhere across the city, the investigation that had been building for months had just been handed the one thing it needed that evidence alone couldn't provide. Proof that the people they were after knew they were cornered and had decided that was a reason to go further rather than stop. Maya took the stairs to her apartment, 3 flights, steady pace. She was almost to her door when she heard a sound from inside that stopped her cold. Movement, small, deliberate, someone careful. Her apartment had been locked when she left this morning. She had checked. She always checked. She stood in the 3rd-floor corridor with her key in her hand and listened to the specific quality of silence inside her own apartment. The silence of someone in there who had just gone still because they'd heard her footsteps in the hall. She stood in the corridor for 3 seconds, not moving, key in her hand, listening to the quality of stillness on the other side of her door. Whoever was in there was good. After that first small sound, they had gone completely quiet. No shift of weight, no breath she could detect, nothing that would tell her position or number. That level of control narrowed the field. This wasn't a random break-in. This was someone who had done this before. She took 2 steps back from her door, silent, and pulled out her phone. Texted the agent in the gray sedan. "Someone in my apartment. Don't announce. Come up quiet." She pressed herself against the wall beside the door frame, the hinge side, where opening the door would put the door itself between her and whoever was inside for the first critical second. She had not stood in this specific posture in 3 years, and her body remembered it without consultation. 20 seconds. 30. She heard the stairwell door at the end of the corridor open and close with careful control. The agent, doing what she'd asked. Footsteps that barely registered on the carpet. He appeared at the end of the hall and she held up 2 fingers, then pointed at the door, then held up 1 finger to indicate she wasn't certain of the number inside. He understood. He came up to the other side of the door frame and they looked at each other across the threshold, and he reached for the radio on his shoulder. She shook her head. If there was more than one, a radio call bought whoever was inside 3 extra seconds to react. She held up 3 fingers, counted down. On 0, she put her key in the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open in one controlled motion, stepping back as it swung. Nothing came through the opening. The agent went in low and she came in behind him, and the first thing she registered was that the living room was empty, and the second thing she registered was the smell. Someone had been here, the specific combination of outdoor cold and something synthetic that clung to tactical gear. Third thing? Her laptop was open on the kitchen table, the screen lit, and it had been closed and locked when she left this morning. The agent was moving through the apartment, room by room, fast and quiet. She stood at the center of the living room and did not touch anything, and listened. He came back 30 seconds later. Clear. His voice was low. Bedroom window was forced. They went back out the same way. She looked at the laptop. The screen showed her documentation folder, the same files she'd photographed and handed to Kolb this morning. Someone had gotten into her apartment, accessed her computer, and looked at the documentation, but they'd left before she arrived, which meant either they'd gotten what they needed or they'd gotten interrupted. Did anyone come in or out of this building in the last 2 hours? She asked. My partner was on foot surveillance. She logged one entry, male, 60s, resident. No exits we didn't account for. He looked at the window. They didn't come through the front. 3 floors up, via the window. Someone had gone to significant effort to get into her apartment quietly, in daylight, without being noticed from the street. That was professional. That was not someone Hale had called this morning on 2 hours' notice. This had been planned before today. She called Voss. They were in my apartment, she said, accessed my laptop. A brief, controlled silence. Then, the files you gave Kolb this morning, the originals on the laptop, are there copies anywhere else they wouldn't know about? The external drive I gave Kolb, and everything's in your evidence system now. She paused. Voss, this was pre-planned. This wasn't a reaction to today. Someone had eyes on my apartment before the convoy arrived, before Torres, before any of this broke open. I know, Voss said, and the way she said it, the flatness of someone stating a fact they'd been sitting with for a while, made the hair on Maya's neck stand up. How long have you known? Maya asked. We identified a Viridian surveillance operation on your address 4 days ago. A pause. We didn't know why you were a target yet. We were still building the picture. 4 days ago, Maya said, before I was suspended, before Torres came in. Yes. She stood in her apartment looking at the open laptop and thinking about what it meant that someone had put surveillance on a nurse 3 days before a Navy SEAL came through the trauma bay. A nurse who had been careful to look like nothing. A nurse who had, apparently, not been as invisible as she'd thought. Someone told them about my background, she said. That's what we believe. Who had access to my actual file? That's the question we've been working on. Voss paused. Carter, I need you to come back to the field office. Don't stay in that apartment. She closed the laptop without touching the keys. There would be prints on it, and she was not going to add to them, and picked up the bag she'd never fully unpacked from this morning. She looked around the apartment she'd lived in for 3 years, the frugal neatness of it, the absence of photographs, the way she'd made it functional without making it personal, the same way she'd made herself functional without making herself visible. She was done with that. She could feel it. Not a decision exactly. More like the moment when you realize a particular posture is costing you more than it's protecting you. I'm on my way, she said. The field office at 6 p.m. had a different energy than it had at 2. There were more people, 2 additional agents she hadn't seen before, someone on a laptop in the corner who had the specific concentration of someone running a live warrant, Marsh on a phone call she didn't end when Maya walked in. Kolb handed Maya coffee without being asked and pointed at a chair. Voss came in 3 minutes after Maya and went straight to the board at the end of the room. An actual physical board, photographs and documents connected by the specific organizational language of a federal investigation that had been running longer than Maya had known about it. Update, Voss said, not to Maya specifically, but to the room. The agent at the laptop looked up. Warrant for Fitch's office communications cleared at 5:47. We have his emails back 30 months. His Viridian contact was a man named Stuart Greer. Appears 17 times in the email chain. The first reference to Viridian services is 14 months ago, 3 weeks after the first of Carter's 11 cases. What's the nature of the contact? Marsh asked. She'd ended her call. Initially operational, Greer advising Fitch on managing staff communication issues. The agent's voice was neutral on that phrase. The language shifts about 8 months in. Greer starts referencing background review on specific staff members. Carter's name appears in that thread 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Before Voss had said they started watching the hospital. Before Torres. Before any of it. They ran a background review on me, Maya said, and found the actual file. We believe so. Voss looked at her. Which means either Greer or someone in his network has federal database access. That was a significant sentence. Maya sat with it. Or, she said, someone with federal database access is working with Greer. Voss held her look. Marsh set down her pen. That's the line we're pursuing, Voss said carefully. We're not there yet. Maya thought about the phone call in the parking lot. Darnell Washington, for example. The use of his full name, the specificity of it. You didn't reach for someone's full name in a threat call unless you'd looked them up, and you didn't look up a hospital floor tech unless you had a reason to believe they mattered. They knew about Darnell's screenshot, she said, before he could have told anyone except me. Kolb looked up. I spoke to Darnell at roughly 9:15 this morning, Maya said. I told him not to tell anyone and not to send the image to anyone. The threat call came at 5:12 this afternoon. In that window, the only person Darnell could have told was his union rep, and only if he called one before going to the compliance interview. She paused. Or there's audio surveillance on Darnell's communications. The room was quiet. Get Washington in here, Marsh said to Kolb. Tonight. Voluntary. Don't make it look like anything except a protective measure. She looked at Maya. Your apartment. Were you doing anything in the days before the convoy arrived that was out of your normal pattern? Maya thought about it. 3 days before, that put it on a Sunday. She had been at the hospital for a Sunday double. One of the charge nurses had called out, and she had spent most of the shift cross-referencing 2 of the 11 cases because a detail in one patient's follow-up notes had caught her attention, and she'd wanted to document the connection while it was clear. I was reviewing my case files, she said, at the hospital, in the break room during a slow hour, on my personal tablet. Was anyone else in the break room? She thought about it. The break room. Sunday, mid-afternoon. Quiet. She'd been at the corner table by the window and there had been, Hale, she said. He came in for coffee. He doesn't usually work Sundays. She paused. He was there for maybe 6 minutes. Did he see your screen? I don't know. She turned it over in her memory, the angle of her tablet, how she'd been sitting, the moment she'd registered his presence and the automatic reflex she'd had to tilt the screen slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough. Possibly, Marsh looked at Voss. That's the trigger point. Hale saw what she was looking at, Voss said, and made a call. Which would mean, Maya said, following it, that Hale's connection to Viridian predates the convoy, predates the Darrow case. He's been working with them for longer than just this week. For at least 14 months, the agent at the laptop said quietly, based on the email thread. She thought about Dr. Lin Chu, who had made the call on Torres's chest tube against Hale's objection and had not flinched doing it. She thought about Darnell, who had saved a screenshot on his personal phone and called her the same night. She thought about the 2 nurses she'd watched transfer out and the one who'd quit, and the paper trail of their departures that she'd documented because she'd documented everything, and which was now in a federal evidence room. I want to know something, she said. The patient outcome irregularities across the 11 cases. Was anyone seriously harmed, beyond what's already documented? The room held a particular stillness. Marsh looked at her directly. One patient in month 4 of our observation window had a cardiac event during a procedure that should have been low risk. She survived, but with permanent damage. A pause. Her chart was amended the same way Darrow's was. Maya did not say anything. She had known it was possible. She had felt it in the edges of the pattern for a long time. The way you feel the outline of something you're not looking at directly. Knowing it was confirmed was different from suspecting it, and the difference sat in her chest like weight. Her name? She asked. Pauline Reyes, 58 years old. She's been told her outcome was an unavoidable complication. She should know what actually happened, Maya said. She will, Marsh said. Not a promise, a statement of procedural fact. When we have the full evidentiary package, which is coming together faster than I expected, partly because of what you brought us today. Maya looked at the board on the wall, the photographs, the connections, the months of work that other people had been doing in a building near the Pearl District while she'd been taking vitals and documenting chart entries and telling herself that keeping her head down was the same as being safe. What do you need from me tonight? She said. But what they needed from her was another 2 hours of recorded testimony, this time specifically focused on the Sunday break room incident and a detailed reconstruction of every interaction she'd had with Hale over the past 3 years that had involved clinical disagreement or documentation. It was not interesting work. It was precise and grinding and required her to locate specific memories in specific sequence and hold them still long enough to be recorded, which was harder than it sounded when the memories were embedded in 3 years of ordinary daily texture. Kolb ran the session. He was better at this than he looked, patient in a way that wasn't passive, letting her find the edges of a memory before he asked the follow-up rather than pushing before she was ready. She revised her initial account of the break room twice, not because she'd been wrong, but because the second and third pass brought up details the first pass had missed. The specific file she'd had open on her tablet screen, the fact that Hale had refilled his coffee twice rather than leaving after one, the way he'd said working late as he passed her and she'd said always without looking up. "He was reading over your shoulder," Kolb said. "I think so. I didn't see him do it, but if you stand at the coffee machine and look left, the angle works." "Okay." He made a note. "What was on your screen specifically?" "Case notes from the Alvarez file. Month 7. I was looking at a medication timing discrepancy between what I documented and what appeared in the final chart." "You documented the discrepancy." "I documented the original timing. The final chart showed a different sequence. I was trying to determine if it was a documentation error or something else." "And were you closer to determining that?" "Yes," she said. "I'd found a second case with the same pattern. I was building the cross-reference." Kolb looked at her steadily. "So Hale came into that break room and saw you cross-referencing cases that documented his alterations?" "Apparently." "And 6 days later, a Navy SEAL convoy arrives at a trauma bay where the on-call roster has been adjusted." The implication sat in the air between them. Neither of them stated it directly because stating it directly required evidence they didn't have yet. The link between Hale's observation of her notes and the roster change, the mechanism, the communication. But the shape was there, and they both saw it. "You think the roster change wasn't about me specifically," she said. "You think it was about making sure the trauma bay was understaffed for a complex military casualty, so that if something went wrong, it wouldn't be Hale's specific hands, it would be a systems failure." "That's a theory," Kolb said carefully. "A theory that implies someone knew the convoy was coming back compromised before it did." "Yes." She thought about that for a moment and then decided she'd reached the edge of what she could usefully speculate about without more information. She was a witness in this investigation. She was not the investigator. She needed to be clear about that line, or she'd start making connections that were intuition dressed as evidence, and that didn't help anyone. "What time tomorrow?" she asked. "We're moving on Fitch at 8 a.m., Kolb said. "Arrest warrant and simultaneous search of his office. Hale gets served at 8:15. We're keeping them separated so neither can warn the other." He paused. "We'd like you available from 7, in case there are questions that come up in the search that need your context." "I'll be here." She stood up. Her back ached from 2.5 hours in the same chair, and she was tired in the particular way that came from using a kind of mental precision she hadn't exercised regularly in 3 years. Kolb walked her to the elevator. "Carter," he said, as the doors opened, "the file they found on you. Your actual service record." He held her look. "I read it." She waited. "You were good," he said, "at the other job." "I know," she said. Not arrogance, just the truth, stated plainly, the way Torres had stated things plainly from a hospital bed. She stepped into the elevator. "I'm also good at this one." The doors closed. Chipotom. Darnell came to the field office at 9 p.m. and left 2 hours later with a federal witness protection protocol and the knowledge that the screenshot on his phone was now part of an evidentiary record that would be submitted to a federal court. He'd sat across from Voss with the particular contained shock of someone finding out that the ordinary building they'd worked in for 7 years had been doing something that was not ordinary at all. And he'd answered every question they asked him with the careful accuracy of a man who had spent his career documenting things precisely because precision mattered in medicine and was discovering that it mattered in law too. Maya was still at the field office when he left. She was in the small kitchen area off the main room, eating a sandwich that someone had left in the refrigerator with her name on it, which meant Kolb had thought ahead. She heard Darnell's voice in the corridor as he was leaving, thanking someone, the automatic politeness of a person in shock, and then the outer door, and then quiet. Voss came into the kitchen and poured water from the tap. He's solid, she said. He's always been solid, Maya said. The screenshot corroborates the audit log. It shows your original timestamp and the documentation sequence exactly as you described it. Voss drank the water. Hale's attorney is going to argue it's insufficient on its own, but combined with the back-end audit and your testimony and the email chain between Fitch and Greer, she set down the glass. It holds. When does Fitch find out about the warrant? He doesn't. Until 8 a.m. Maya thought about Fitch, a man she'd seen twice in 3 years, at all staff meetings, a face above a podium saying words about patient care and institutional standards. The distance between those words and the email chain Voss's team had pulled was not a distance she could measure in any unit that made human sense. The state medical board complaint against my license, she said. What happens to that? Once Fitch is arrested, his standing as the complainant is compromised. The board will receive a formal notification from OSY by 9 a.m. that the complaint originated as part of a pattern of witness intimidation. Voss looked at her. It won't be instant. There'll be a review process on their end, but we don't anticipate it moving forward. How long is the review process? Typically 30 to 60 days, she paused. I know that's not nothing. No, Maya said. It's not. She looked at the half-eaten sandwich. But it's manageable. She said it because it was true, and because she was trying to stay in the lane of what was true rather than what was scary, which had always been her operating principle in situations that were trying to tip over into chaos. She slept on a cot in the back room of the field office that night because going back to her apartment felt wrong, and she didn't have anywhere else to go that felt right, which was its own kind of information about the life she'd built in Portland. Voss offered. Maya accepted without argument, which surprised her slightly. She was getting less good at performing self-sufficiency. She slept badly, which was normal, and was awake by 5:30, which was also normal. She lay on the cot in the gray pre-dawn and ran through everything she knew about the following morning. Fitch, Hale, the warrant, the 8:15 secondary service, the way these things went when they went well, and the ways they could go wrong. At 6:40, she was dressed and drinking coffee in the main room when Kolb came in, looking like he'd also slept at the office, which he probably had, with the look of a man who had been on his phone in the hour before sunrise. Something changed, she said. It wasn't a question. Hale's attorney made contact at 6 a.m., he said. Preemptive. She's asking about cooperation terms. Maya sat up slightly. Hale wants to cooperate? His attorney is asking. There's a difference. Kolb sat down across from her. She's representing it as him having information relevant to the scope of the investigation that goes beyond what we currently know. He's going to give up Fitch, or claim to, in exchange for a reduced exposure on the falsification charges. Kolb looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. The problem is we're serving both warrants in 70 minutes. If Hale cooperates and Fitch's team figures out that's what's happening before we serve Fitch, Fitch runs, Maya said, or destroys something, or makes a call. He rubbed his face with one hand. We're not delaying the Fitch service, but we need to manage Hale's attorney in the next hour without tipping anything. What does she know about what you have? Presumably what Hale knows, which is the suspension, the investigation flag, and whatever Viridian has told him. He doesn't know about the email chain, Maya said. He doesn't know you have the Greer connection. No. Then his attorney's offer is worth less than she thinks it is. She held the coffee cup in both hands. He's trying to leverage information about Fitch as if it's rare. But you already have Fitch. Kolb looked at her. I know. So let the attorney make the offer, Maya said. Listen to what she says Hale knows. You'll learn something either way. Either he knows something you don't, which is useful, or what he thinks he has matches what you already have, which tells you the limit of his knowledge and helps you manage the service timing. She paused. Don't commit to anything. Just listen. Kolb was quiet for a moment. You do this kind of analysis often, he said. I used to, she said. I'm remembering how. At 7:50 a.m., Voss assembled the team. Maya stood at the edge of the room. not participating in the operational briefing, just present, which Voss had cleared with her 2 hours earlier. She listened to the assignments, the communication protocol, the specific sequence of the two services. She noted the way the agents organized themselves, the efficiency of it, the absence of drama. Professionals doing the work. At 8:03, the first team entered Redwood Valley Military Medical Center through the main administrative entrance with a federal arrest warrant bearing Gerald Fitch's name. Maya knew this because Kolb's radio gave the field team's entry confirmation, and she heard it clearly from where she stood. At 8:09, the second team found Dr. Victor Hale in his office, where he had arrived early. He always arrived early. It was part of his self-presentation, and served him with simultaneous arrest and search warrants. This she also heard on the radio. She heard the agent read Hale his rights in the flat, procedural tone of someone for whom this was an ordinary professional task. She stood in the field office and listened to the radio traffic and felt something move through her that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief. Something more complicated. 3 years of quiet. 3 years of documentation. 3 years of being the nurse people didn't look twice at, and it had come to this: federal agents in 2 locations at once, warrants with both names, the machinery of consequence finally moving at the speed the situation required. At 8:17, Kolb's radio produced a sound that was not part of the expected protocol. He frowned at it, asked for a repeat. The field agent's voice came back, and the static couldn't obscure the specific quality of controlled urgency underneath the words. Fitch isn't in his office, the agent said. His assistant says he called in at 6 a.m. Personal emergency. She doesn't have a location. Kolb looked at Voss. Voss was already on her phone. Maya stood at the edge of the room and thought about a man who had received a call from his attorney at 6 a.m. and had been in contact with Viridian for 14 months and had, apparently, understood at some point in the last 12 hours that the walls were closing and had made a decision about what to do about that. And then her phone rang. Unknown number. The same unknown number from the parking lot yesterday. She looked at it for one ring, looked at Voss, who was still on her phone, looked at Kolb. She answered. You should tell your federal friends, the flat, unhurried voice said, that Mr. Fitch has documentation of his own. Specifically, documentation of the source that gave us your real file. A pause. I think they'll find it very interesting, and I think you'll find it very uncomfortable. The person who told us who you actually are has been sitting in that building with you for 3 years. The voice paused one final time. Someone you trusted. The call ended. Maya stood holding the phone in a room full of federal agents, and the room felt suddenly different than it had 30 seconds ago. Smaller and colder, and full of a question she hadn't thought to ask until just now. Not who had helped build the case against Hale and Fitch, but who had handed her to them in the first place. She stood holding the phone and did not move for the count of 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Kolb. Fitch has documentation. He's claiming someone inside the hospital gave Viridian my real file, someone who's been there for 3 years. Kolb crossed the room in 4 steps. Play it back. It ended. The recording system got it, the agent at the laptop said. He was already pulling it up. The voice came through the speakers, flat, unhurried, that particular practiced calm, and every person in the room went still to listen to it. When it finished, Voss put her phone down. He's trying to buy time, she said. Fitch bolts at 6 a.m., arranges for Greer to make a call at 8:17. Classic deflection. Throw something at us that requires verification, creates confusion, makes us hesitate. Maybe, Maya said, but the information has to come from somewhere real, or it's worthless as leverage. If Fitch is using it to negotiate, it has to have enough truth in it to be credible. The room held that. Someone told Viridian who you were, Kolb said, stating it plainly. That part we already knew. We didn't know it was someone from inside Redwood Valley. We assumed it was someone with federal database access, Voss said. Someone in Greer's network. Both can be true, Maya said. A person inside the hospital identifies me, tells someone. That someone has the access to pull the real file. She looked at the board on the wall, the photographs, the connections, the months of accumulated evidence, and thought about 3 years of faces. The break room on a Sunday, working late. The angle of a coffee machine, and a screen she'd tilted just slightly, but maybe not enough. Hale saw my tablet, she said. That's what we established last night. But Hale isn't a person who would know what he was looking at. He'd see someone cross-referencing clinical files. He wouldn't understand why that was significant unless someone told him it was. Kolb caught it. Someone told Hale to watch you. Or told him what it meant when he saw it. She crossed to the board. Who has been at Redwood Valley long enough to know my patterns, has some understanding of what a classified service record looks like, and had a reason to be in contact with Hale or Fitch outside normal channels? That's a significant population, the agent at the laptop said. Narrow it, Voss said. Who knew Carter specifically, not just a nurse who kept good notes? Who knew she was someone worth flagging? The question sat in the room. Maya thought about 3 years. The faces that appeared consistently. The people she'd had genuine exchanges with rather than transactional ones. Darnell, who was sitting under a protective protocol right now, and whose involvement she'd never doubted for reasons she couldn't fully articulate but trusted. Dr. Chu, who had backed her call on Torres's chest tube without hesitation. The nurses who'd transferred out, who'd had their own reasons to leave. And then a face appeared in her memory that she hadn't put there deliberately. A man who had been at Redwood Valley for longer than she had, who worked in hospital administration, specifically in the department that handled staff credentialing and personnel records, who had been in Hale's office twice in the last month that she'd seen, which she'd registered as unusual but not alarming, who had once, early in her second year, asked her a question about her nursing school that had been slightly too specific, slightly too casual, slightly too interested in the answer. Neil Briggs. She said the name out loud. The room looked at her. He handles credentialing, she said. He's the one who processes incoming staff records. He would have seen whatever documentation I submitted when I was hired. If there was anything in my original application that looked thin, fabricated education history, abbreviated background, a credentialing administrator would notice. She paused. And 3 years is a long time to sit on something like that without a reason to use it. Until the reason appeared, Kolb said. Until Fitch needed it, she said. Kolb was already at the laptop agent's side, giving him the name. The agent ran it, and the results came up in 40 seconds. The speed of someone who had the right access and the right databases. Neil Briggs, 51, the agent said. Credentialing and records, Redwood Valley, 9 years. No flags. He scrolled. Except... He stopped. Except what? Voss said. His mortgage. Refinanced 14 months ago. Cash out refinance, significant amount. Then 6 months ago, another large cash deposit. Not from a mortgage, no listed source. He looked up. It's in his banking records. We have his financials because he's adjacent personnel on the Fitch warrant. 14 months. The same window as the first Viridian email. The same window as the start of the alteration pattern in the clinical records. He's been paid twice, Maya said. Once to identify me. Once to confirm something. Possibly to confirm that I was still looking. She thought about the Sunday break room. Hale coming in for coffee. Did Briggs tell Hale to go look? We need Briggs, Voss said. She looked at Kolb. Can we add him to the scope of the Fitch warrant? Not without going back to the judge. We have the banking irregularity, the agent at the laptop said. Unexplained cash deposits to an individual employed in a position of financial trust at a federally affiliated facility. That's a standalone flag. I can have a supplemental warrant drafted in 40 minutes. Do it, Voss said. Then to Maya. Does he know you know? No, Maya said, unless Fitch called him after bolting, which Fitch might have done if he's burning his contacts on the way out. Then we move on Briggs now, before Fitch reaches him. She picked up her radio. And we put every available resource on finding Fitch, Geb. Neil Briggs was found at his desk at 8:51 a.m., processing credentialing renewals with the specific industry of a man who had come in early and was doing his ordinary work and had not yet received the phone call that would tell him the ordinary work was over. Maya wasn't there for his arrest. She was in the field office, listening to the radio confirmation, sitting at the conference table with the particular stillness of someone who has been running on adrenaline for 18 hours and has just felt it begin to ebb. Kolb came and sat across from her. He's in custody, he said. Briggs. He lawyered up immediately, which means he knows what this is. Did he call anyone between 6 a.m. and now? We're pulling his phone records. He paused. Carter, you identified him in less than 4 minutes from a 3-sentence phone call. I had 3 years of information, she said. I just hadn't organized it the right way. Most people don't organize it at all. He leaned forward slightly. The work you did, the documentation, the cross-referencing, the 3 years of being thorough when nobody was asking you to be, that's not just a good habit. That's what broke this case open. The warrant on Fitch's email came from your 11-case file. The Darrow chart alteration was confirmed by your original timestamps. The Briggs connection came from a phone call designed to intimidate me, she said, which you didn't let intimidate you. She looked at the table. She was trying to stay even. She was tired, and something under the tiredness was starting to surface. Not emotion exactly, more like the specific ache of a long-carried weight beginning to shift. Hale's attorney, she said. The cooperation offer. Did she follow through? She withdrew it at 8:20. He almost smiled. Once Hale was in a room with federal agents and understood the scope of what we have, the calculus changed. His attorney needed to regroup. He thought he was the most important card in the deck, Maya said. He always thought that. She sat with that for a moment, then, Fitch, where do you think he is? Oregon-Washington border if he drove, or he took a private flight. We're checking the small airfields. He doesn't have a commercial record leaving Portland in the last 18 hours. Kolb's expression was the professional neutral of someone who was not going to say we'll find him, because that was the kind of thing people said when they wanted to sound reassuring rather than accurate. She appreciated the honesty of not saying it. He'll surface, she said. Men like Fitch always surface. They can't help it. They've spent too long being the person in charge of things to be comfortable being the person running from things. She was right about that, as it turned out. Gerald Fitch was located at 11:42 a.m. in a hotel room in Vancouver, Washington, 20 minutes across the state line, where he had checked in under his wife's maiden name and had apparently spent the morning on his laptop and his phone before concluding, correctly, that the phones were already compromised and it was over. He did not resist arrest. The agent who brought him in said he looked less like a man who'd been caught and more like a man who'd been waiting for the thing he knew was coming to finally arrive. Maya heard that detail and understood it. There was a particular exhaustion that came from maintaining something wrong for a very long time. She'd seen it in enough people to recognize it. The formal statement from OSIS went to the media at 3 p.m. Maya was not in the room where it was drafted. She was not named in the initial release. That was deliberate, and Voss had explained it cleanly. Her name would come out, the clinical record would come out, but the sequencing mattered, and naming a key witness in a public statement before the arraignment was not how you protected the integrity of the proceedings. She understood. She agreed. She sat in the field office kitchen and watched the statement go out through the laptop feed the agent had pulled up and read the language that described a systematic patient care fraud scheme, falsification of medical records, witness intimidation, and the arrest of 2 senior officials at Redwood Valley Military Medical Center, Victor Hale, Gerald Fitch, both names. In print, in a federal statement. She read it twice. Then she closed the laptop and sat with her coffee going cold. Voss came in 20 minutes later. The hospital board is meeting right now, she said. Emergency session. 2 board members have already issued personal statements distancing themselves from Hale and Fitch. Institutional self-preservation, Maya said. Yes, but the effect is the same. Public confirmation that the conduct was individual, not systemic. Voss sat down. They're going to want to discuss your return. Maya looked at her. My return. Your suspension was issued by Hale under false pretenses as part of a pattern of witness intimidation. It won't survive the hour. Voss paused. The board is going to want to get ahead of that. Make it look like a correction rather than a consequence. It is a consequence. I know. Voss held her look. What you do with it is your call, but I wanted you to hear it from me before the hospital's attorneys call you, which they will, probably within the next 2 hours. Maya thought about the building across the city, the emergency room with its 2 bright lights and the patients in the waiting area and the vitals monitors and the particular texture of a Thursday double when everything came in at once. She thought about Torres on the 4th floor, rebuilding himself one careful breath at a time, She thought about Pauline Reyes, 58 years old, who had survived a cardiac event she'd been told was unavoidable and who deserved to know that it wasn't. "The state board complaint," she said. "On my license." "OS, I filed the formal notification at 9:07 a.m., Voss said. "It'll take time, but the complaint won't proceed. Your license is intact." She exhaled once, short and quiet, the same way she'd exhaled in Torres's room when Hale had walked out. "Okay," she said. "But the hospital's chief legal officer called at 2:48 p.m. Maya let it go to voicemail, listened to the careful language of institutional damage control, and called back. She had 3 conditions. First, her suspension was to be formally rescinded with documented acknowledgement that it had been issued improperly and without clinical basis. Second, the clinical records of all 11 cases she had documented were to be reviewed by an independent external panel, with any patient who had been adversely affected notified and given access to their corrected record. Third, Darnell Washington's file was to be cleared of any compliance flags that had been added in the last 48 hours. The legal officer said she would need to consult with the board. Maya said she'd wait. The callback came in 19 minutes. All 3 conditions accepted. She didn't feel triumphant about it. She felt something more like the specific satisfaction of a task completed to the correct standard. The same feeling she got when a chart was precisely documented and the documentation actually matched what had happened. It was not a feeling that asked for celebration. It was just the feeling of things being right instead of wrong. She went to see Torres that afternoon. The 4th floor was different now. The guard outside 412 was military police rather than general security, which told her that Solis had made some calls about the Viridian visit. She showed her ID. Her real badge was still at the security desk downstairs, waiting for the formal reinstatement paperwork, but her OSI visitor authorization still worked, and the MP nodded her through. Torres was sitting up higher than yesterday. The color in his face was closer to normal. The Malinois was on the floor beside the bed, and when Maya came in, the dog stood, stretched, and pressed her nose briefly against Maya's hand before returning to her position. "Sit down," Torres said. "You look like you've been awake for 2 days." 1.5, she said. She sat. "I heard." He didn't specify what he'd heard. He didn't need to. "Solis briefed me this morning. How are you feeling?" "Like the surgery went well and the PT is going to be significantly worse." He said it without self-pity. "How are you feeling?" She thought about that. It was a question people asked as a formality, and she'd been answering it as a formality for 3 years. Fine, good, managing. The automatic language of someone who had learned to treat their internal state as information not to be shared. "Tired," she said, "and like something's been set down that I was carrying without knowing how heavy it was." Torres nodded. He understood that kind of tired. "The woman I was before Portland," she said. Not because she'd planned to say it, but because she was sitting in a room with someone who already knew what she was talking about, which made it possible. "The job I left it because something went wrong on a mission, and I made a call, and the call was right, and 2 people died anyway, and I couldn't—" She stopped, started again. "I couldn't make it make sense. Right call. People still died, and the people above me used that to close the file, and I used it to close myself." Torres was quiet. He didn't rush toward it or away from it. "You came here," he said finally. "I came here," she agreed. "I thought if I was small enough and quiet enough and careful enough, it would—" She stopped again. "I don't know what I thought it would do." "Protect you from it happening again," he said. Not unkindly, just accurately. "Yes." "Did it?" She looked at him. "No." "No," he agreed. "It never does." He shifted slightly, managing the pull on the surgical site. "I've worked with a lot of people who have seen things go wrong despite right calls. There are 2 ways it goes. Some people get smaller, some people get better." He paused. "You kept your documentation current for 3 years in a place where nobody was asking you to. You kept your skills sharp even when the job didn't require it. That's not a person getting smaller." She sat with that. "I altered the wrong thing," she said. "I made the training invisible instead of making the fear visible." "Yes," he said. "That's it exactly." It was the most precise articulation she'd found for what had been wrong with the last 3 years, and it came out in a hospital room in a military ward in Portland, and it was not a revelation so much as a confirmation of something she'd been circling for a long time. "What are you going to do now?" Torres asked. "Go back to work," she said. "There are patients who deserve an accurate record of what happened to them. There are staff members who need to know that the documentation they filed was real, even when someone tried to alter it." She paused. "And there's a trauma program at this hospital that has apparently been running understaffed and under-resourced because the people who were supposed to manage it were managing something else instead. Are you going to run it?" She hadn't said that. She looked at him. "Solis told me about the board meeting," he said, "and about your conditions, and about the independent review." He held her look. "Those aren't the conditions of a person who wants to go back to being a floor nurse." She didn't answer immediately, because he was right, and she knew he was right, and saying it out loud made it real in a way she wasn't entirely ready for, but was going to have to be. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's fair?" He nodded. "But you're going to have to stop treating your instincts like they're dangerous." "They got me suspended," she said. "They saved my life," he said. "Same instincts." Hale's arraignment was 3 days later, in a federal courtroom that was not full, but was fuller than Maya had expected. She was not required to attend. She attended anyway, sitting in the back row with Kolb 2 seats to her left, and Darnell, who had asked to come and whom she had not told not to, 1 seat to her right. Hale entered in a suit, which was the kind of choice people made when they wanted to look like themselves rather than what they'd become. His attorney was good, expensive, careful, the kind of attorney that came with resources. He pled not guilty. That was expected. The charges were read: falsification of medical records, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, obstruction of a federal investigation, and witness intimidation. 4 counts. The judge set bail and conditions, and the gavel came down. It was not dramatic. These things rarely were in real life. There was no moment of televised confrontation, no collapse, no public confession, just a man in a suit listening to charges being read against his name, and the machinery of consequence doing its slow, grinding, impersonal work. Fitch was arraigned separately, later that same week. His charges included all of Hale's plus 2 additional counts related to the unauthorized access to classified military information and conspiracy to interfere with a protected military operation. That last charge was the one that had come out of what Solis and the OSI team had been able to reconstruct about the roster change, that someone had provided the convoy's compromised status to Fitch before the unit landed, and that the duty roster adjustment had not been negligence but preparation. Preparation for what specific outcome the investigation was still untangling, but the charge existed. It was on the record. Briggs pled guilty at a separate proceeding and agreed to full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He confirmed that he had identified Maya's thin documentation in her original hiring file, had cross-referenced it with contacts he'd cultivated during a previous job at a defense contracting firm, and had put her name to Fitch's people 18 months ago as someone who might be worth monitoring. He confirmed the 2 cash payments. He confirmed that he had suggested Hale observe the break room on the Sunday in question. He had done all of this not from political conviction or deep loyalty, but because he needed money and had calculated that the risk was small and the return was adequate. He said this in the proceeding with the flat frankness of someone who had stopped pretending. It was, in its own way, the most honest thing anyone connected to this situation had said publicly. Maya read the transcript of his proceeding in her apartment. She had gone home, had the lock replaced, had bought a plant for the kitchen window because she had decided on impulse that the apartment needed something alive in it. She read Briggs's words and felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. Something adjacent to both. The knowledge that you could be someone's calculation, that the years you built could be someone else's risk assessment. She set the transcript down, looked at the plant, which was an unremarkable pothos that had no particular merit except that it was difficult to kill. She could relate to that. But the independent clinical review took 6 weeks to complete. Maya participated in it fully: testimony, documentation, real-time consultations with the external panel when they had questions about specific cases. It was not easy work. Walking through 4 years of someone else's systematic damage to patient care, case by case, required a specific kind of steadiness that she had to rebuild each morning before she went in. Some days she managed it better than others. Some days she sat in her car in the parking lot for 5 minutes before going inside. She did not tell anyone about the 5 minutes in the car because it was a small and private act and she was allowed to have those. The panel's final report named 4 patients who had received materially substandard care as a result of the falsification scheme. Of those 4, 3 were alive. 1 had died, not immediately, not in the hospital, but 6 months after discharge with a cardiac condition that had been improperly managed and inadequately documented. His name was Robert Haynes, and he had been 64 years old, and he had a daughter named Simone who worked as a teacher in Southeast Portland and who received a call from the hospital's patient advocacy office, and then another call from the independent review panel, and then a letter explaining what had actually happened to her father and what the hospital was doing about it. Maya was not part of those calls. She was not supposed to be, but she knew about them because the panel kept her informed. And the night after Simone Haynes received her letter, Maya sat at her kitchen table for a long time with the light on and the plant on the windowsill and the knowledge that thorough documentation could correct a record but could not correct a death, and that sometimes right calls and good work still ended with something irretrievable. She sat with that for a long time, not to resolve it, just to let it be true. She was reinstated to Redwood Valley 3 weeks after the arraignments, with a formal letter of acknowledgement that her suspension had been improperly issued and her clinical record was clear. The letter came with a second document, an offer to join the hospital's trauma program leadership, a newly restructured position created in the wake of the review and the board's reorganization. She did not accept immediately. She took 11 days. During those 11 days, she had 3 conversations that mattered. The first was with Voss over coffee. Not at Alara's on Burnside, but at a different place, a table by the window, the kind of conversation that wasn't professional anymore, but wasn't quite personal yet. "You could do something else with the background you have," Voss said. "Not recruiting, just observing. There are positions that would use more of it." "I know," Maya said. "But medicine is where the work is immediate. You do the right thing and you can see it in the next hour. That's rare." She paused. "And I'm tired of the other kind of work. The kind where you spend years building something and the thing you built is a case file." Voss looked at her. "No offense taken." "None intended," Maya said. "You're good at it. I'm just better at this." The second conversation was with Torres, who was 2 weeks into physical therapy and deeply unhappy about it in the specific way of people who had spent their lives depending on physical capacity and were now watching a stranger help them relearn how to use stairs. She brought him coffee from the hospital cafeteria, which was bad coffee, but better than nothing, and they talked for 40 minutes about things that were not the case, about the Malinois, whose name was Beck, and about Torres's home, which was in Coronado, and about Portland rain, which he had decided he did not mind. Before she left, he said, "Beck is a good judge." She looked at the dog, who was lying with her head on her forepaws and one eye open. "She likes you," he said. "She doesn't like most people she meets in hospitals." "I don't blame her," Maya said. The third conversation was with Darnell in the break room, the same break room, the same corner table, the same window, over the bad cafeteria coffee she had apparently decided was her fate. "If you come back," he said, "is it going to be different?" "Yes," she said. "How?" She thought about how to say it. "I spent 3 years making myself small so I could stay safe. The staying safe part didn't work. The small part just made everything harder for everyone who depended on me to be what I actually am." He looked at her for a moment. "So you're done being small?" "I'm done performing small," she said, "which is different. I'm still going to be the person who documents everything and double-checks the chart and escalates through proper channels. But you're going to push harder when it matters." "Yes," she said. "I'm going to push harder when it matters." He picked up his coffee. "About time," he said. But she accepted the position on a Thursday. The letter of acceptance was 1 paragraph, written plainly, and she sent it at 7 a.m. before her shift started because she had a tendency to overthink things in the afternoon when she was tired, and the morning was when her judgment was clearest. She walked into Redwood Valley Military Medical Center at 7:15 and took the stairs to the 3rd floor and changed into her scrubs and clipped her badge, her badge, real and current and valid, to her pocket and went to the nursing station and looked at the board. 6 patients on her floor. 2 post-surgical, 1 pending discharge, 3 active cases requiring attention. The morning shift was starting to move. Darnell was at the counter, logging into his workstation. He looked up when she came to stand beside him. He didn't say anything. He just slid slightly to the left to make room at the counter, the way he'd always made room, the way people who worked well together learned to do without discussing it. She logged in. On the 4th floor, Torres was running through the physical therapy sequence he hated, one careful repetition at a time, Beck watching from the corner with the patient amber focus of a dog who understood that some things required witnesses. In a federal building across the city, the documents in the Hale Fitch case were being organized for trial. Hundreds of pages, 3 years of pattern, the slow, careful architecture of consequence. In a classroom in Southeast Portland, a woman named Simone was teaching a room full of children how to read, carrying the knowledge of what had happened to her father and what it had cost and what it meant that someone had finally told her the truth. None of that was resolved. Cases went on for years. Grief didn't have a timeline. Consequences took their time. But Maya Carter was standing at a nursing station in a hospital she had almost been driven out of, doing the work she was trained for, being what she actually was, instead of the reduced version she'd offered the world for 3 years. That was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the whole thing. She had come here 3 years ago trying to disappear into competence. What she'd found instead was that competence, real competence, the kind that lived in your hands and your instincts, and the careful accumulation of what you'd learned in the hardest classrooms. That was not a thing you could make invisible. Not for long. Not when it was needed. She had tried to protect herself by becoming forgettable. The people who had wanted her gone had tried to make her gone. And she was still here. That was the simple version of what had happened. The longer version was 3 years of documentation and 1 Navy SEAL and a federal investigation and a man named Briggs who had underestimated what it cost to be someone's calculation and a board that was now rebuilding its standards from the ground up because 1-floor nurse had kept thorough notes. The thing about being underestimated, Maya had learned, was that it told you almost nothing about your actual capacity and almost everything about the limits of the person doing the estimating. Hale had looked at her and seen a liability. Fitch had looked at her and seen a problem to be managed. Briggs had looked at her and seen a number in a risk column. None of them had seen what Torres had seen in a trauma bay on a Thursday evening when the equipment was out and the pressure was dropping and someone's life was in the balance. A person doing exactly what they were built to do, without asking for permission, without waiting to be acknowledged, without needing anyone in that room to understand what they were watching. The monitor at bed 3 showed a patient coming up toward wake-up from the overnight sedation. Maya crossed the floor to check the vitals sequence and noted the numbers and made the adjustment that the numbers indicated and documented it in real time with the timestamp that reflected exactly when she did it, because that was how you kept a clean record, and because clean records were how you protected patients and held people accountable, and built the kind of evidence that could survive a courtroom. She had always known that. She had been doing it her whole career. She was just done pretending she didn't know why it mattered. Down the corridor, the day shift was filling in. Voices, footsteps, the ordinary morning sounds of people starting the work. Darnell called something across the station that made another nurse laugh. The monitor at bed 3 settled into a steady rhythm. Maya stood at the bedside of a patient who didn't know her yet and checked the chart and was exactly, precisely, entirely who she was. That was enough. It had always been enough. She just hadn't been willing to let it show.